The mess hall of Fort Bragg always carried the same early morning rhythm. The clatter of trays and silverware rang above the steady hum of conversation. The scent of scrambled eggs, powdered coffee, and sausage links lingered in the air, mixing with the faint odor of disinfectant that never quite disappeared from military dining facilities. Soldiers came and went in clusters, their voices weaving into a chaotic chorus of stories from the barracks, gripes about drill sergeants, and jokes meant to hide the exhaustion of endless training days. At a corner table, near the wall where the light from tall windows filtered through dusty blinds, sat a lone figure. She wore fatigues like everyone else, her name tape tucked just out of sight, her cap placed neatly beside her tray. Her movements were deliberate, calm, almost methodical. She cut into her food with the kind of precision that suggested a mind always at work, always aware. Her back remained straight, her shoulders relaxed but not slouched, and her eyes seemed to survey the room without ever truly moving. To the untrained eye, she was just another soldier, someone grabbing breakfast before another long day. But there was something different, something in her stillness. It was the kind of presence that didn't need to be announced. Even in silence, she carried a weight that turned heads without people realizing why. Across the room, 4 young soldiers, barely out of basic training, noticed her. They were a tight-knit group already, bonded through shared misery and drills and the bruising humor that came with being the lowest-ranking men in uniform. Private First Class Daniels, tall and broad-shouldered, carried himself with the swagger of someone who had always been strongest in his class back home. Specialist Ramirez, wiry and sharp-toned, was the joker, constantly stirring trouble just to cut through the monotony. Then there was Carter, the quiet one, observant but often dragged into antics by the others. And finally, Thompson, the youngest of the group, whose eagerness to prove himself sometimes made him reckless. They sat at their usual table, halfway through their meals, when Daniels noticed her first. He nudged Ramirez with his elbow. "Check her out," Daniels muttered under his breath, nodding subtly toward the woman in the corner. Ramirez followed his gaze and smirked. "Not bad. Haven't seen her before. Must be new." Thompson, always eager, leaned in. "Think she's a recruit? Maybe in from another unit?" Carter didn't answer immediately. His eyes lingered on her posture, the way she seemed completely unfazed by the noise around her. "I don't know," he said finally. "She doesn't look new. She looks seasoned." Daniels chuckled. "Seasoned? What, like the sausage?" But Carter didn't smile. Something about the woman unsettled him, though he couldn't put it into words. She looked too composed for a recruit, yet too young to be an officer. Her uniform was standard, no special insignia that marked her out, yet the atmosphere around her seemed different. "Only one way to find out," Ramirez said with a mischievous grin. "Let's go say hi." The others hesitated. Approaching someone at the mess hall, especially a stranger who radiated authority without rank, wasn't something they did lightly. But bravado was currency among young soldiers, and none wanted to be the one who backed down. Daniels was already pushing his tray aside, standing tall, and the rest followed. Thompson with the most excitement, Carter with the most reluctance. They walked across the mess hall, the sound of their boots echoing lightly against the linoleum floor. A few other soldiers glanced their way, curious, but quickly returning to their own meals. When they reached her table, Daniels was the first to speak, sliding onto the bench across from her. "Mind if we sit here?" he asked casually. She looked up, her gaze sharp but not hostile. "It's a free table." Her voice was steady, controlled, neither warm nor cold. Ramirez grinned and dropped down beside Daniels. Thompson and Carter followed, filling the benches until they surrounded her. It was the kind of move soldiers made without thinking, a display of camaraderie, a way to test someone's response. Daniels leaned forward slightly. Haven't seen you around before. You new here? She took a sip of her coffee before answering. Not exactly. Her tone was clipped, a kind that gave nothing away. It wasn't dismissive, but it wasn't inviting either. Daniels frowned slightly, unused to being stonewalled. Ramirez, never one to let a silence linger, jumped in. So where you from? You stationed here? Or just passing through? He asked, his grin widening as if he could charm answers out of her. She set down her fork, finally meeting his gaze. Just here for a while, she said simply. Something about the way she looked at him made Ramirez falter, his grin tightening into something more forced. He wasn't sure why, but it felt as though she could see straight through him. Thompson, oblivious to the tension, piped up. I bet you're training for something big, huh? Special assignment, maybe? His tone was eager, almost admiring. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied them all, her eyes moving from one face to the next. None of the soldiers spoke. They waited, caught in the weight of her silence. When she finally spoke, her words were calm but firm. What about you four? What are you here for? The question caught them off guard. Soldiers weren't often asked why they joined. Not like that. Daniels smirked, covering his uncertainty with bravado. I'm here to serve my country. Do my part? Ramirez shrugged. Honestly? Better than flipping burgers back home. Thompson leaned forward eagerly. My dad served. I wanted to make him proud. Carter hesitated, then said quietly, I wanted discipline, structure, something real. She nodded slowly, as if weighing each answer, her eyes thoughtful. Then she picked up her fork again and returned to her meal, leaving them stewing in the unease of her silence. The four exchanged glances. For the first time since sitting down, none of them had the upper hand in conversation. Daniels shifted uncomfortably. Ramirez scratched at his neck. Thompson tried to think of something clever to say, but his words stuck in his throat. Carter simply studied her, his curiosity deepening. Around them, the mess hall continued as usual, trays clattering, voices rising and falling. But at that table, the air felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. They hadn't realized it yet, but they weren't the ones doing the testing anymore. She was. And in that quiet corner, with nothing more than calm words and steady eyes, she had already begun to unsettle four young soldiers who thought they had everything figured out. The clamor of the mess hall faded into the background as the four soldiers sat around her, pretending to be at ease. But unease had already settled in their chests. Something about her calmness unnerved them. Soldiers, especially young ones, were loud, restless, always proving themselves. She, however, was the opposite, quiet, composed, as though nothing in the room could disturb her. Ramirez, never one to accept silence, leaned forward with a grin that carried more confidence than he felt. So, he said, tapping his fork against his tray, what's your story? Everyone's got one. She didn't look up from her meal. Same as anyone else, she said evenly, just here to serve. The answer was simple, yet it held finality. Ramirez expected her to elaborate, to crack a joke back, maybe give him something to build on. But she didn't. She cut into her food and ate with deliberate calm, leaving him hanging. His grin faltered, but Daniels jumped in, unwilling to let her slip through their grasp so easily. Come on, there's no way that's all there is to it, Daniels pressed, puffing his chest a little. Nobody ends up here without a story. You don't just roll out of bed one day and decide to throw on camo. This time, she looked up. Her eyes met his, steady and unblinking. Daniels felt a strange shift, like he was no longer leading the conversation, but being weighed, measured. He swallowed and tried to maintain his bravado, but his smirk weakened under her gaze. "You'd be surprised," she said simply, then returned to her meal. The soldiers exchanged glances. Thompson, the youngest, was practically bouncing with questions. He'd never been good at hiding his curiosity. "Are you with a unit here on base?" he asked quickly. She tilted her head slightly, as though considering whether to answer. "For now," she replied, leaving no more detail. That only stoked his curiosity further. "Which one?" Her eyes flickered toward him. "Does it matter?" Thompson stammered, caught off guard by the bluntness. "Well, I guess not. I just thought." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, not mocking, but controlled. "Then maybe don't think too much." Ramirez chuckled at Thompson's reddening ears, though even he felt the weight of her words. They weren't delivered harshly, yet each cut deeper than if she'd shouted. She had a way of turning questions back on them, stripping their confidence piece by piece. Carter, who had been quiet, finally spoke. His voice was measured, careful. "You seem like you've been doing this a while." She glanced at him. There was no humor in her expression, but also no denial. "Long enough." That was all she gave, but it was enough to shift the mood at the table. Carter's observation hadn't been meant as a challenge, but it landed as truth. She did seem like she'd been doing this longer than most in the room. Daniels bristled at the silence that followed, unwilling to let her dominate the conversation so easily. "All right then," he said, forcing a grin. "Let's see what you've got." Her brow lifted slightly, but she didn't speak. Daniels leaned forward, lowering his voice as though setting a challenge. "Quick test. You ever done the obstacle course? Bet I can beat your time." Ramirez snorted, slapping the table. "Now that's a bet I'd watch." Daniels thinks he's king of the monkey bars. The woman set down her fork, her expression unreadable. She regarded Daniels for a long moment, then finally asked, "Why?" The question threw him. "Why what? Why would I need to prove myself to you?" The table went quiet again. Daniels opened his mouth, then shut it, caught between irritation and confusion. He wasn't used to being dismissed so directly. Usually, challenges sparked bravado, competition, banter. But she had sidestepped it entirely, leaving him flat-footed. She picked up her coffee, sipped, and set it back down. "Strength doesn't need to announce itself," she added calmly. That line settled like a stone in the pit of their stomachs. Thompson stared at her with wide eyes. Ramirez scratched the back of his neck, and even Daniels' broad, loud Daniels found no quick retort. Still, Ramirez wasn't ready to surrender. He grinned again, though it was thinner this time. "All right, but you've got to admit you know your stuff. I mean, the way you talk, the way you sit, it's not exactly recruit behavior. You sure you're not a drill sergeant undercover?" For the first time, a flicker of amusement passed over her face, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Would you act differently if I was?" she asked. Ramirez blinked. He opened his mouth to answer, then realized whatever he said would only make him look foolish. He shut it again. Carter studied her carefully. Her answers weren't random. They were deliberate, designed to cut through their noise and test them. In a way, she was interrogating them without them even realizing it. Each time they tried to corner her with a question, she turned it around, peeling away their bravado. And yet, there was no arrogance in her tone. She wasn't mocking them, wasn't belittling them. She was simply steady, like a mountain that no wind could shake. The noise of the mess hall carried on around them, but at that table, the four soldiers felt as though they were in a different space entirely, one where the usual rules of banter and bravado didn't apply. They were no longer leading the conversation. She was. It was Carter who finally recognized the truth first. He leaned back slightly, arms crossed, studying her with narrowed eyes. "You're not here to eat," he said quietly. "You're here to watch." Her gaze flicked toward him, meeting his with an intensity that confirmed his suspicion. She didn't answer, but the silence was louder than words. Ramirez glanced between them, uneasy now. "Watch what?" he asked, his grin finally gone. She didn't reply. Instead, she lifted her tray, stood, and with calm, precise movements, carried it to the dish line. No rush, no wasted energy. She returned her cap to her head, adjusted it, and walked toward the door without another word. The 4 soldiers sat frozen in place, staring after her. None of them had expected to be left speechless in their own game. As the door swung shut behind her, Thompson leaned in, whispering the thought that had been burning in his mind since she left. "Who the hell is she?" Carter didn't answer. He only knew one thing. Whoever she wasn't ordinary. And for the first time since arriving at the base, Carter felt like they had brushed against something far bigger than themselves. The others laughed nervously, trying to shrug off the encounter, but the truth lingered in their minds. They hadn't surrounded her. She had allowed them to sit, allowed them to speak, and then dismantled their bravado piece by piece. The curiosity that drew them in had only deepened. None of them realized it yet, but this was only the beginning. The mess hall was quieter now, though the smell of burnt coffee still lingered, and the sound of clattering trays drifted from the far side. Most soldiers had already eaten and gone, leaving clusters of a few stragglers. But at one table, 4 young men sat in restless silence. Daniels leaned back against the bench, his arms crossed tightly across his broad chest. He hated the way she had walked out, leaving them speechless. No one left Daniels speechless. He was the talker, the leader of their group, the one who always had a comeback. Yet she had taken control without raising her voice. Ramirez drummed his fingers against the table. His grin had long since faded, replaced by a furrowed brow that betrayed his unease. "She's hiding something," he muttered. "She's not hiding," Carter replied, his tone thoughtful. "She just doesn't give anything away." Thompson's head whipped between them. "So what do we do? Just wait until she shows up again?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying his nerves. Daniels slammed his hand against the table. "No, next time we push. She wants to act mysterious? Fine, we'll get answers." And they did not have to wait long. 2 mornings later, the mess hall was alive again with chatter, and there she was, same seat, same posture, same calm presence. She didn't look around the room. She didn't need to. Her presence filled the space without effort. The 4 soldiers exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between them. This time, they wouldn't be the ones caught off guard. They approached with trays in hand, sliding into the benches around her. She didn't flinch, didn't even pause mid-bite. Daniels forced a grin. "Back again. Guess you like the food." Her eyes flicked to him, unreadable. "Something like that." Carter spoke next, his tone polite but deliberate. "We were wondering, what do you think about the endurance drills here? Pretty brutal, right?" She set down her fork. "Brutal?" she repeated. Carter shrugged. "Yeah, the long runs, the obstacle course, carrying gear in the heat. I mean, they push us hard." She studied him for a moment before replying. "If that's brutal, you haven't seen real endurance yet." The soldiers froze. Daniels leaned forward, seizing on the opening. "Oh yeah? And what's real endurance then?" Her eyes met his, calm and unwavering. "Endurance isn't running a few miles with gear. Endurance is pushing when you've been awake for 3 days straight. It's moving silent through mud in the dead of night, knowing that one mistake could cost your team their lives. It's carrying more than your body should allow, because someone else needs you too." Her words hit like a punch. Daniels blinked, suddenly at a loss. Ramirez let out a low whistle, trying to cover his nerves. Sounds like you've been there, he said. She didn't answer, but the silence spoke louder than words. Thompson, wide-eyed, leaned in. What about weapons training? We've been working the M4 South, but my aim's still all over the place. Any tips? This time, her lips curved in the faintest smile. You're gripping too tight. Stop strangling the rifle. Let it breathe with you. And breathe with it. Thompson's jaw dropped. How do you? She continued, cutting him off gently but firmly. And stop closing one eye. Both open. The battlefield won't wait for you to line up a perfect shot. The 4 soldiers stared. None of their drill sergeants had said it like that. None of them had spoken with that level of certainty, as though every word came from years of lived experience. Ramirez tried to shake it off. All right, so you know a little about shooting. Big deal. What about ambush drills? We just started practicing those last week. Her gaze settled on him, cool and unblinking. Your fire team stacks too close. You think you're covering each other, but you're just creating a bigger target. And you don't check the ground before you move. You'd be surprised how much noise you make stepping on dry twigs in the dark. Ramirez froze. He hadn't told her about the last drill, the one where their squad had been chewed out for exactly that mistake. How the hell? He started, then trailed off. She picked up her coffee again, sipping it as though nothing unusual had been said. Daniels leaned forward, his bravado cracking. Who taught you all this? She set down her cup, her eyes locking on his. Experience. The word lingered in the air like a weight. For the first time, the 4 young soldiers felt small. They weren't sitting across from another recruit, or even a drill sergeant. They were sitting with someone who knew things they hadn't yet imagined, someone who had walked paths they weren't sure they could survive. Carter's chest tightened. He studied her carefully, trying to find a crack in her armor, a hint of exaggeration. But there was none. Every word, every subtle movement, radiated authenticity. Around them, the mess hall clatter seemed distant, as though the rest of the base existed in another world. Here, at this table, the 4 of them were facing a test they hadn't prepared for. It wasn't physical. It wasn't written in a manual. It was the kind of test that revealed who they were beneath the bravado. Daniels shifted uncomfortably. Ramirez stopped drumming his fingers. Thompson sat straighter, as if afraid to breathe wrong. And Carter? Carter just kept watching, the question forming in his mind, but never leaving his lips. Who are you really? The soldiers didn't know it yet, but they weren't testing her. She was testing them. The mess hall was alive with its usual chaos boots scraping across linoleum, trays clattering on stainless steel, the drone of tired voices rising in uneven waves. Overhead lights buzzed faintly, their glow casting long, sterile shadows across the floor. It was the rhythm of life on base, predictable, noisy, and mostly unremarkable. For Daniels, Ramirez, Carter, and Thompson, however, this morning felt different. The woman sat in her usual corner, posture sharp, movements precise. By now, her presence had become an unspoken mystery between them. She hadn't offered much, yet she had given enough to unsettle them all. Daniels had convinced himself he would catch her out this time. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, watching her carefully. She didn't rush her meal. She didn't glance around nervously, like the other new recruits sometimes did. Everything she did was deliberate. It bothered him. People always gave themselves away eventually, some twitch, some nervous tick. But not her. Look at her, Daniels muttered under his breath. She doesn't even blink. Ramirez smirked, though his tone lacked its usual bite. Maybe she's a robot. Thompson shook his head quickly. Nah, she's different. You can feel it. Carter didn't say anything. He just kept his eyes on her, studying the way her gaze scanned the room casually, yet with purpose, as though she were aware of everything at once. The moment came suddenly. A recruit at a nearby table stood up too quickly, his tray piled high with food. He'd barely taken 2 steps before the plate tilted, sending a plastic cup of water tumbling toward the floor. The sound of the tray clattering echoed, heads turning instinctively. But before the cup hit the ground, she moved. One hand darted out, fast and precise. In a blur, she caught the cup mid-air, water still sloshing inside, but not a drop spilled. The recruit froze, wide-eyed, as she calmly handed it back to him. "Careful," she said simply. The recruit stammered a quick thanks and hurried off, his face flushed red. The hall erupted in laughter from a few nearby tables, but not at her, at him. The woman sat back down, her movements smooth, composed, as though nothing unusual had happened. She returned to her meal without acknowledgement, as if catching a falling cup mid-flight was as natural as breathing. At her table, silence fell. Daniel's jaw tightened. Ramirez blinked slowly, his usual grin nowhere to be found. Thompson sat frozen, his eyes wide as saucers. "Did you see that?" Thompson whispered. "She barely moved," Ramirez said, his voice lower now. "Like she knew it was coming." Daniels tried to shake it off, forcing a scoff. "Reflexes. Big deal." But even as he said it, the words tasted hollow. Carter leaned forward, his voice steady. That wasn't reflex. That was training. Years of it. None of them argued. They couldn't. The precision was undeniable. She hadn't just reacted, she had anticipated. The moment the tray slipped, she had already moved, like her body knew what to do before her mind even processed it. They sat there, stunned, as she continued her meal without acknowledging their stares. Finally, Ramirez forced a laugh, though it came out strained. "All right, so she's quick. Doesn't prove anything." But the others didn't buy it. "Doesn't prove anything?" Thompson repeated, incredulous. "She caught that cup before it hit the floor." "Who does that?" "People who've been under fire," Carter said quietly. That silenced them again. None of them wanted to admit it, but he was right. Reflexes like that didn't come from drills alone. They came from experience, the kind they hadn't even sniffed yet. Daniels leaned forward suddenly, lowering his voice. "All right, I'll say it. She's not like us. She's something else." Ramirez frowned. "Like what?" Daniels hesitated, then muttered, "Special forces." The words hung in the air. Thompson's eyes widened. Ramirez shook his head quickly. "No way. They wouldn't stick someone like that here. Not with us." But Carter didn't dismiss it. He kept his gaze on her, watching the way she carried herself, the way she didn't flinch at the noise, didn't posture like other soldiers. "Maybe they would," he said softly. "Maybe she's here for a reason." As if sensing their eyes on her, she glanced up briefly. The look wasn't harsh, but it silenced them instantly. For a split second, they felt like children caught sneaking cookies before dinner. Then she returned to her food, unconcerned. The 4 sat rigid, none of them speaking for a while. Daniels finally broke the silence, his voice low and unsteady. "Whatever she is, I'm not letting her get in my head. She's just another soldier." But the conviction wasn't there. Ramirez leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You keep telling yourself that." Thompson, still wide-eyed, whispered, "She's not just another soldier." "I know it. You saw her." Carter didn't reply. Instead, he leaned back in his seat, thoughtful. He'd seen something in her eyes during that brief glance, something he couldn't quite name. Calm, yes. Control, definitely. But deeper than that, something colder. Something that came from seeing things most people couldn't imagine. It wasn't the look of a recruit. It wasn't even the look of a seasoned sergeant. It was the look of someone who had carried the weight of life and death and walked away unchanged. And Carter knew then, with absolute certainty, that she was testing them. Every word, every silence, every subtle action, it was all part of something bigger. The others hadn't realized it yet. They were still trying to fit her into their world recruit, Sergeant Special Forces. But Carter suspected the truth was beyond any of their guesses. The thought unsettled him, but it also sparked something else, respect. As she stood to leave, placing her tray neatly in the return line, the 4 soldiers watched in silence. She adjusted her cap, shoulders squared, and walked toward the exit without hurry, without hesitation. When the doors swung shut behind her, Thompson spoke first. "She's not like anyone I've ever met." Ramirez shook his head slowly. "She makes me feel like a rookie." Daniel slammed his palm against the table, frustration boiling over. "We are rookies. But whatever she is, she's not untouchable. Next time, I'm getting answers." Carter said nothing. He kept his eyes on the door, replaying the image of her hand catching the cup in midair. Quietly, almost to himself, he muttered, "You don't get reflexes like that unless you've lived on the edge." And though none of them wanted to admit it, they all felt the same creeping realization. The woman in the corner was no ordinary soldier. She was something else. The mess hall had always been their gathering ground, a place where conversations came easy banter, gossip, the daily complaints of recruits, ground down by endless drills. But after the incident with the cup, that easy rhythm was gone. Daniels, Ramirez, Carter, and Thompson found themselves circling one subject over and over like moths drawn to a flame. Her. The woman. The mystery. Every morning, she sat in the same corner, never late, never early, always precise. And every morning, the 4 of them tried to pretend she wasn't there, only to end up whispering about her as though she were a puzzle they couldn't stop trying to solve. By the 5th day, Daniels had had enough. "I'm asking her today," he said firmly, slamming his tray down on their table. Ramirez chuckled, but it was a nervous sound. "Yeah? And what exactly are you going to ask?" "Excuse me, ma'am. Are you secretly a superhero?" Daniels glared at him. "I'll ask her straight. Who she is. Where she came from. Why she's here." Thompson's eyes darted toward her corner. "What if she doesn't answer?" "And she doesn't answer." Daniels leaned forward, lowering his voice. "But we'll know by the way she reacts. Everyone gives something away." Carter didn't join in. He studied his food silent. Part of him wanted answers as much as the others did, but another part of him knew this wasn't a game. Whatever she was hiding, it wasn't something ordinary. He could feel it. The moment came during the lull of the meal. The hum of voices filled the hall, boots thudded on the floor, and trays clattered against stainless steel. The woman sat alone at her usual table, quietly eating, eyes flicking now and then to the door, the windows, the people around her. She wasn't nervous, she was calculating. Daniel stood abruptly. Time to end this. He strode toward her table, tray in hand. Ramirez and Thompson exchanged wide-eyed looks before scrambling to follow. Carter sighed, but rose too. He couldn't let them go without him. She didn't look up as they approached, but when Daniel set his tray down opposite her, she shifted slightly in her seat, making room. Her eyes lifted then, cool and unreadable, landing first on Daniel's, then sweeping across the others. "Something I can help you with?" she asked. Her voice was calm, even. Daniel sat down, leaning forward with the weight of someone determined to get what he wanted. "Yeah, you can start by telling us who you are." The woman tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Who I am?" "That's right." Daniel's jaw tightened. You don't talk to anyone. You sit here every day like you're watching us instead of eating. And then, he gestured sharply, that stunt with the cup. Nobody moves like that, unless they've had training. Special training. Ramirez slid into the seat beside him, trying to look casual but failing. Thompson sat stiffly, nervous but too curious to back out now. Carter took the seat at the end, silent, his eyes fixed on her. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she placed her fork down carefully, folding her hands on the table. Her gaze swept across them once more, pausing briefly on each face. "You've been talking about me," she said at last, her tone not accusing but factual. Daniels didn't flinch. "Yeah, we have. And you've decided I'm not what I appear to be, because you're not." The faintest flicker of amusement crossed her face, so subtle it could have been imagined. "So, you came here to interrogate me." The word hung in the air, heavier than the clatter of trays around them. Ramirez shifted uncomfortably. Thompson swallowed hard. Daniels leaned in further. "We just want the truth." Her eyes locked onto his, unblinking. "The truth is dangerous when you're not ready for it." That silenced them. Daniels opened his mouth to argue, but she spoke again, her voice cutting across his. "You think you want to know who I am. But the real question is," she leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp. "Who are you?" The soldiers froze. Ramirez tried to laugh it off. "What, like a therapy session now?" Her eyes shifted to him. "You mask fear with humor. You've been doing it since day one. But when the bullets fly, jokes won't save you." Ramirez's grin faltered. She turned to Thompson. "And you? You doubt yourself at every step. You're waiting for someone to tell you you're good enough. In combat, hesitation kills. Do you think the enemy will wait while you make up your mind?" Thompson's throat tightened. He couldn't meet her eyes. Then her gaze fell on Daniels. "And you? You think control comes from pushing others down, from proving you're stronger. But real control is discipline. Until you learn that, you're just reckless. Reckless gets people killed." Daniels' face reddened, anger flashing in his eyes. "You don't know me. I know enough." Her voice was steady, cool as ice. Finally, she turned to Carter. For a long moment, she said nothing, just watched him. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. When she did speak, her words were different, quieter, but heavier. "And you're the only one who sees me clearly. Not because you know who I am, but because you know enough to be cautious." Carter felt a chill crawl up his spine. He didn't respond. She leaned back then, folding her arms loosely. "You came here for answers, but you're not ready for them. When you are, you'll stop asking who I am and start proving who you are." Silence blanketed the table. The noise of the mess hall seemed distant now, muffled by the weight of her words. Daniels clenched his fists. He wanted to argue, to demand, to force her to tell them something, anything. But under her gaze, his confidence wavered. Ramirez shifted uncomfortably, muttering, "Well, that's one way to turn the tables." Thompson said nothing, staring down at his tray, cheeks burning. Carter finally spoke, his voice low. "She's right." 3 pairs of eyes turned to him in disbelief. He continued, steady but thoughtful. "We're so focused on her that we're missing the point. She doesn't need to prove anything. We do." Her eyes flicked toward him briefly, and for the first time there was the faintest hint of approval. The silence stretched, then she stood, gathering her tray. As she passed them, she paused just long enough to say, "When you're ready, you'll stop looking at me and start looking at yourselves." Then she was gone, leaving the 4 soldiers in a silence more deafening than any explosion. Daniel sat back hard, frustration etched across his face. Ramirez shook his head slowly, muttering under his breath. Thompson sat in stunned silence. And Carter couldn't shake the feeling that her words weren't just a lecture. They were a challenge. A challenge none of them fully understood yet. The base buzzed with unusual energy that morning. Recruits were lined up in the yard, hacks strapped tight, rifles slung across shoulders, the air thick with the nervous anticipation that always accompanied a field exercise. For Daniels, Ramirez, Carter, and Thompson, it was a chance to prove themselves. The exercise was meant to simulate battlefield conditions, patrols, ambushes, endurance. Most recruits dreaded it, but Daniels welcomed the challenge. "This is it," he muttered as they marched into formation. "Out there, it's not about words. It's about who can keep up." Ramirez smirked, though his hands fidgeted with his rifle strap. "Yeah, well, just don't trip over yourself trying to impress." Thompson kept quiet, glancing nervously at the instructor's barking orders. Carter stayed focused, scanning the line. And then he saw her. She stood near the front, her pack already settled neatly, rifle secured, posture as straight as ever. She didn't look tense. She didn't look eager. She just looked ready. The sight unsettled Daniels. There she is. Let's see what Mystery Woman does when she's not sitting in the corner of a mess hall. The exercise began with a grueling march across uneven terrain. Mud sucked at their boots, tree branches scratched their arms, and sweat poured down their faces under the weight of their gear. Soldiers groaned, stumbled, cursed the instructors, but pushed forward. Daniels, determined to lead, surged ahead. Ramirez cracked jokes between gasps for breath. Thompson struggled, but kept moving, refusing to fall behind. Carter marched steadily, conserving his strength. And her? She moved like the terrain didn't matter. Her stride was efficient, her breathing controlled, every step deliberate. Where others stumbled, she flowed. Where others faltered, she adjusted seamlessly. "Look at her," Thompson whispered, panting. "It's like she's not even tired." Daniels growled. "She's hiding it. Everyone's tired." But deep down, even he knew better. Hours passed. Packs grew heavier, legs weaker. When the order came to set up camp, recruits dropped their gear with groans of relief. Some collapsed outright, gulping water like it was the last they'd ever drink. The 4 soldiers set to work, clumsily pitching their shelter. The rain started just as they finished, fat drops drumming against the canvas. Daniels cursed under his breath, struggling to tie a knot that wouldn't hold. That was when Carter noticed her. She had built her shelter quickly, efficiently, using less material than anyone else, yet making it sturdier. The rain slid harmlessly off the angled fabric. Her pack was neatly stored. Her rifle was cleaned and secured. She worked with the precision of someone who had done this in far harsher conditions. Ramirez whistled low. "You see that? Took her 10 minutes. We've been at this for half an hour, and ours looks like it's ready to collapse." Daniels glared at him. "So what? Doesn't prove anything." But the next phase would. The recruits were split into squads for a night exercise. Patrols through the woods with instructors staging ambushes. The 4 soldiers found themselves grouped together, and to their surprise, she was added to their squad. Daniels almost protested, but held his tone. This was it. The chance to see what she could really do. The forest was dark, shadows twisting in the moonlight. Branches cracked under careless boots, and the distant call of an owl echoed through the stillness. The squad moved cautiously, rifles raised, eyes darting. It didn't take long for the first ambush. Instructors hidden in the brush opened fire with blanks, the sound deafening in the quiet night. Recruits shouted, stumbled, fired wildly into the trees. Daniels cursed, diving for cover. Ramirez fired back blindly, his aim scattered. Thompson froze, then dropped flat, panic in his eyes. Carter tried to rally them, shouting for cover fire. And then he saw her move. She didn't panic. She didn't shout. She dropped low, her body blending into the terrain, her rifle raised in a steady, controlled motion. She picked her targets one by one, short bursts, precise, economical. When the instructor stopped firing, the squad regrouped, panting. Daniels looked around in disbelief. We didn't even get hit. Ramirez wiped sweat from his brow. That's because of her. Thompson nodded shakily. She knew exactly where they were. Daniels tried to shrug it off, but his voice cracked. Lucky, just lucky. But Carter saw it differently. He'd been watching her closely. The way she had read the terrain, the way she had predicted the ambush before the first shot was fired. That wasn't luck. That was training, the kind that came from years of survival under fire. As the night wore on, the squad faced 2 more ambushes. Each time, chaos erupted among the recruits. And each time, she moved like a shadow, calm and decisive, guiding them without ever giving orders. By dawn, when the instructors called an end to the exercise, most squads were battered, exhausted, their shelters ruined, their morale broken. But their squad? They were intact. Their shelters held. Their ambush survival rate was higher than anyone else's, and everyone knew why. As they trudged back toward base, mud-caked and bone-weary, Daniels finally broke the silence. His voice was low, almost grudging. She saved us out there. Ramirez nodded. No kidding. If it weren't for her, we'd still be lying in the dirt. Thompson exhaled shakily. She's not just good, she's something else. Carter didn't speak, but his thoughts churned. She hadn't done it for recognition. She hadn't boasted or even acknowledged her role. She had just done what needed to be done, quietly, efficiently. And for the first time, he wondered if she wasn't simply a better soldier. Maybe she was something they couldn't even measure themselves against. As they reached the gates, instructors barked orders. Recruits stumbled to their barracks, and the base returned to its familiar rhythm. She peeled away from the squad without a word, heading toward her quarters, her posture as composed as ever. The 4 of them stood watching her go, silent. Finally, Ramirez whispered, I don't care what she says. She's not just one of us. Thompson nodded. Daniels said nothing. His pride was too wounded, his mind too tangled. And Carter, his eyes still following her, said softly, We just saw a glimpse. That wasn't even her full strength. None of them argued, because deep down, they all knew he was right. The afternoon sun hung low over Fort Bragg, casting long shadows across the training grounds. Exhaustion still clung to Daniels, Ramirez, Carter, and Thompson from the night's grueling exercise. But it wasn't physical fatigue that weighed most heavily. It was curiosity, mixed with something else. A gnawing need to understand the woman who had so effortlessly outclassed them. Daniels had been brooding since breakfast. Every time he replayed the field exercise in his mind, a single thought surfaced, louder than all the others. Who is she? Look, Daniels muttered to the others, walking alongside them back toward the barracks. We've tried subtle. We've tried polite. She's testing us. I'm not waiting anymore. I'm asking her straight. Ramirez smirked nervously. Asking her straight? You mean like, who the hell are you? Yes, Daniels snapped. Exactly like that. No more games. Thompson shivered slightly, unsure whether to be terrified or impressed. Carter, as always, was quiet, observing. He didn't argue, but he understood the weight of what Daniels was about to do. By late afternoon, the 4 of them found her again, not in the mess hall, but near the edge of the training grounds, where soldiers practiced marksmanship and hand-to-hand drills. She was alone, checking her rifle with meticulous care. Sunlight glinted off the barrel as she adjusted the sights, each movement smooth, precise, deliberate. Daniels took a deep breath and approached. "Hey," he called, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "Can we talk?" She looked up slowly, her expression neutral. "Talk?" "Yes," Daniels said, forcing a grin. "I mean, we just want to know who you are. No games, just straight answers." For a moment, she didn't move. Then she set the rifle down carefully, facing him. "And what makes you think I'll answer?" Daniels bristled. "Because we're not playing anymore. We've seen what you can do. We know you're not just another soldier." She tilted her head slightly, studying him with eyes that seemed to see everything at once. The weight of his fatigue, the tension in his jaw, the pride he tried to hide. Then her lips curved into the faintest smile, almost imperceptible. "You've been watching me," she said, "following my every move, asking questions, trying to prove yourselves. Do you realize how foolish that looks?" Daniels faltered, but only for a moment. "Maybe, but we need to know. We need to understand. You," he gestured broadly, encompassing her skill, composure, and quiet dominance. "You're unlike anyone we've ever met." She sighed softly, shaking her head. "I'm exactly like the soldiers who trained me. And yet, I'm not." Ramirez shifted nervously. "That's helpful?" "No," she said simply. "Not at all. But it's true." Daniels took a step closer. "Look, we don't care about secrecy. We just want to know your name. Who trained you? What you're really here for." For the first time, she moved deliberately, walking closer to him. Her presence was commanding, not threatening, but every step carried authority. Daniels felt it pressing against him like a physical weight. "You don't get it," she said softly but firmly. "You think knowing my name or my unit matters. It doesn't. What matters is what you do. How you act. Whether you can handle what you've already seen." Thompson whispered, almost to himself. "She's talking in riddles." "You still don't get it," she said, glancing at him. Her gaze moved across each of them in turn. "You've spent all this time focused on me, trying to figure me out, and all the while, you've ignored yourselves. Your limits. Your weaknesses. And those are the things that will get you killed." Carter stepped forward, finally breaking his silence. "We know that now, but we've been trying. We've been learning. You need guidance?" She interrupted, her voice sharp but not cruel. "You've had guidance since the day you stepped on Mace. What I can give you isn't instruction. It's an example. But example isn't enough unless you choose to follow it." Danielle's frustration boiled over. "So you're saying we'll never know who you are?" She shook her head. "You already know. You've seen it. You've seen how I act, how I move, how I survive. That is who I am. Nothing more. Nothing less." Ramirez let out a low whistle. "So, she's telling us we've been asking the wrong questions the whole time." "Yes," she said. "Exactly." Daniel stepped back, breathing hard, anger mixed with awe. "So that's it? You're going to leave it at that?" She smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. "You can ask me 100 more times, and I'll answer in the same way. But here's the difference. I don't need your approval. You need mine in the sense that your lives depend on understanding what you've already seen, not what you want to hear." Thompson swallowed hard. You just flipped the whole thing on us." "Exactly," she said. "It's not about you figuring me out. It's about you figuring yourselves out. That's the real challenge." Daniels clenched his fists, but nodded slowly. Deep down, he knew she was right. They had spent days obsessed with her identity, chasing answers they weren't ready for. She had outpaced them physically, mentally, and strategically at every turn. And now, even knowing that, he realized that the chase was only part of the lesson. Then, Daniels exhaled, letting some of the tension drain from his shoulders. Then I guess we've got to work on ourselves. She nodded once, simply. Exactly. For a moment, the sun dipped behind the trees, casting her in a soft glow. Her calm, controlled presence was impossible to ignore. Daniels, Ramirez, Thompson, and Carter stood there, realizing that the answer they sought, her identity, was less important than the truth of her skill and composure. And in that moment, they understood something crucial. Her identity didn't define her. Her actions did. She bent to retrieve her rifle, slinging it effortlessly over her shoulder. Then she started walking back toward the base, leading them in silence. Daniel shook his head, muttering, "I can't believe it." We were ready to storm her with questions, and she taught us more than any instructor ever could. Carter finished, his voice quiet but steady. Ramirez grinned reluctantly. Yeah, lesson learned, I guess. Thompson shook his head in awe. I don't know if I'll ever forget this. Daniels remained silent, still trying to process the confrontation. For the first time, he realized the woman wasn't a puzzle to solve. She wasn't a target to figure out. She was a living lesson in discipline, skill, and composure. And that lesson was far more valuable than any answer about her past or her title. They followed her back toward the base at a distance, each lost in thought, realizing that she had quietly, effortlessly, changed how they viewed themselves and what it meant to be a soldier. The mess hall buzzed with the usual mid-morning energy. Soldiers laughed and joked, trays clattered against the counters, and the smell of eggs and coffee filled the air. But for Daniels, Ramirez, Carter, and Thompson, the room felt different today. They entered together, scanning the tables automatically, as if expecting her to appear out of nowhere. And there she was seated in her usual spot, calm, composed, her gaze sweeping over the room as always. Daniels exchanged a look with the others. Today, he muttered under his breath, we find out. They approached, trays in hand, hearts thumping. Each of them remembered the field exercise, her flawless execution of ambush drills, her calm precision in danger, her subtle guidance without words. They'd come to understand one truth. She wasn't just a soldier. She was something else entirely. Daniels took a deep breath. All right. We know you're exceptional. We know you're more than any of us. But it's time. Who are you? She looked up at them slowly, eyes steady, unreadable. A faint smile tugged at her lips. I suppose there's no avoiding it anymore, she said softly. You've seen enough, you've learned enough, and you've asked enough. Ramirez leaned in, barely able to hide his excitement. So, spill it. Who are you really? She took a sip of her coffee, setting the cup down deliberately. Then, in a voice that carried the weight of authority and experience, she said, I am a Navy SEAL. The four of them froze. The words hung in the air like a shockwave. Daniel's jaw dropped. A SEAL? Yes, she confirmed, calm and precise. Not a drill sergeant. Not a standard unit. A Navy SEAL? Thompson blinked rapidly. Disbelief etched on his young face. That explains everything. Carter's eyes widened. Everything? Yes, she said, meeting his gaze steadily. The reflexes. The calm under pressure. The guidance you thought I gave without speaking. All of it comes from training far beyond this base, beyond any standard program you've experienced. Ramirez shook his head slowly, muttering, No way. She's a SEAL. That's insane. She smiled faintly. Insane, perhaps, but true. And now you know. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. It doesn't change what you've learned from observing me. And it doesn't change the lessons you've gained. Daniels ran a hand through his hair, still struggling to process the revelation. All this time, we thought you were just a mystery soldier. And all along, his voice trailed off. All along, I was training you too, she said gently. Not intentionally, not officially, but every encounter, every subtle lesson, every time you tried to test me, it was preparing you for the challenges you'll face out there. Thompson shook his head, awe in his eyes. I can't believe we didn't figure it out sooner. You weren't meant to, she said. The point wasn't to figure me out. It was to see yourselves. Daniels finally shook his head, a mix of frustration and admiration. You're incredible. And terrifying. She allowed herself a small smile. I'll take that as a compliment. Ramirez leaned back, exhaling slowly. So, all those stunts, all that calm, all the stuff we couldn't explain. SEAL training? Every bit of it, she confirmed. Years of experience, missions, and discipline beyond the ordinary. You've seen only a fraction of what it takes. Carter nodded thoughtfully. No wonder you didn't answer our questions. You weren't here to talk. You were here to show us. Teach us without telling us. Exactly, she said. And now you've learned. That's the most important lesson any soldier can grasp. Silence fell at the table, not awkward, but reflective. They weren't just staring at her. They were processing the scale of what they had witnessed over the past days. A cup in the mess hall, the patrol exercises, her calmness, her authority. Each moment had been a piece of a puzzle they hadn't known existed. Daniels finally spoke, a mix of awe and resolve in his tone. I think we understand now. You're not just exceptional. You're a standard we've been chasing without even realizing it. She nodded once. And now, it's up to you to set your own standard. To become better soldiers, not by imitation, but by learning from what you've seen. Thompson looked almost dazed. All this time, we were scared of you, and now, we respect you more than anyone we've ever met. Ramirez leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief. I don't know if I can ever look at a recruit the same way again. Good, she said simply. Respect is earned, not assumed. That applies to everyone here. Even me. Daniels exhaled, a mixture of relief, frustration, and admiration. All right. I get it now. You're a Navy SEAL. Nothing more needs to be said. But one thing's for sure. We're never underestimating anyone again. Not you, not anyone. She smiled faintly, finishing her coffee. Then you've learned the last lesson. Don't underestimate yourself or others. The rest comes with time and experience. The four soldiers sat back, absorbing her words. The lesson was clear. It wasn't about catching her, testing her, or knowing her story. It was about realizing the level of discipline, skill, and awareness required to survive as a soldier and understanding that there were always people who would challenge their limits. The mess hall continued to buzz around them, oblivious to the small table where four young soldiers had just been given the most extraordinary revelation of their lives. And as she stood, picked up her tray and walked away, Daniels, Ramirez, Thompson, and Carter watched her go not as a mystery, not as a challenge, but as a standard to respect, learn from, and strive toward. For the first time, they understood what it meant to truly see a soldier in action. And they knew one thing with certainty. They would never forget the Navy SEAL who had walked into their lives, unassuming, and changed them forever. The four of them sat in silence for a long moment, reflecting on the lessons they'd learned, the respect they'd earned, and the awe they'd witnessed. The story of the mysterious woman, now revealed, was not just about identity. It was about skill, discipline, and the quiet power of leading by example. And in that moment, They all knew the truth. She had already taught them far more than any classroom, drill, or lecture ever could.